Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Tim Kulig Free Music Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Kulig, and today I have my best friend and cohort, Tom Seymour. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, yeah, man, what is going on? It's 2025. I'm looking at my wrist like I have a watch on it. I'm like,
It's
what's going on?
2025.
It's halfway through February already, 2025, and holy cow, dude. Like, this year is like...
Yeah, a few things for your listeners that may not know. I direct films, feature-length films over the past decade. So, except for one exception, it's been primarily feature-length documentaries. Though we did do Exorcism of Fleet Marriage, which was, believe it or not, that was 2022. So that feels like we did that last year, you know?
I know.
Which that was an interesting feature-length horror film with your music actually, which I thought was really cool, you know. But just been working on this new project called Video Dreams.
Yeah, tell the audience a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's somewhat autobiographical about sort of the beginning of my film career. Tim's in it a lot because, like, even as teenagers, we would do these videos together. So it chronicles about 30 years of filmmaking. And so the pitch is sort of, I think the tagline was from blockbuster dreams to streaming screens, a filmmaker's journey through a vanishing world. And
I dig that. It's very flourishing. It's very, you feel the journey in that subtitle. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's like but basically it's like the main thrust was like trying to get on the shelves at Blockbuster Video, although that relationship has always been complicated because although, no one really likes what they did to the mom and pop video stores, they were sort of the brass ring for filmmakers like me and you that, like, large theatrical was very difficult. And we, like, I'm an AV nerd. I actually like doing everything. I like shooting. I like editing. I like the audio. So that was the focus. So they tended to be smaller budgets. And when the budgets even started to balloon a little bit, it felt more wasteful.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always like a person who kind of liked it small. I liked, small, lean crews that shoot fast. I didn't like big crews that shoot slow,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the bigger the budget, it feels like there's a lot of bloat and there's inefficiency. Efficiency loves scarcity, right? Like, literally, like, when you have scarcity, you're like, okay, I want to do these 10 things. I only have money for 5. So how do I pull this off? And invariably, you're going to end up getting like 12 because you're going to find ways to be efficient. You're going to find ways to sneak around corners and get things for free or do some pairing off, give some people some movie credit, but also get a benefit to your movie, stuff like that. And just like bring things to the table that a normal production would be like, we'll just pay for that. No problem. We have $100 million budget. And the next thing you know, you're overpaying threefold for tons of stuff. It's just ridiculous, right?
Yeah, I think a large level of corruption sneaks in.
Mm-hmm.
You start throwing money around at stuff that you really shouldn't. I think for us, after Mark of the Beast came out in 2012, we only spent $6,000 on it, and it had Ellen Muth in it, shot at the Labossiere camp there. It was a beautiful, like, summer camp spa type place, thanks to you guys. And, had everything in place, and I thought it was a solid movie, and I think it recovered like $1 or $2,000 on the budget,
Yeah.
So at that point, I was like, well, I better start pivoting if I want to keep doing this,
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I think, and I've said this in numerous podcasts and interviews I've done in the last couple of months, where some of the people, probably more than half of the people I've talked to, are unaware of the fact that I also do movies. So, or they kind of knew, and I started explaining to them, and they're like, oh, wow, you're really into that. I'm like, yeah, been doing that for like 30 years now.
Yeah.
And most of them are like 1,000-foot understand that the rise and fall of the movie industry, but don't understand the economics and the finance side of things and how they're like, hey, why don't we see A, B, and C coming out of Hollywood anymore? And I'm like, well, first and foremost, let's talk about revenue streams. And I go through the whole thing from the VHS Massacre series where you're just like, there's no money. There's no money. You know,
there's no money. You know, that mid-range, let's say $1 million to $10 million films, a lot of those are like foreign. If you look at them, a lot of them are like Eastern European and all places that tend to have things bankrolled by the government, you know, have,
right.
You know, deep pockets from, you know, some kind of endowment, you know,
or it's
tax
a studio domestically here that's taken real chances again, like A24, or what's the other one that did Megan?
Was that? I thought that was A24, but then I know there's Jordan Peele's company. He does some stuff. It's true. A24. The thing people don't understand about A24 when they call it independent. A24 was the guy who started it worked for the I think it was called the Guggenheim Group, which has billions and billions of dollars,
God, yeah.
And he managed it, and he was head of it, left, and immediately got funded by the Guggenheim Group, like, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars,
right?
If not more. And basically from there, he was like, okay, I'm gonna make independent films now. But what they were able to do, everything's A-list. Like all the DPs, all the directors, and usually there's some names in them. So this idea that they're independent is, I don't think it's really true. They're kind of what Miramax was back in the day, which was
sense.
Not independent at all. It was, they used to call it a mini major, but Miramax cranked out more films than anyone.
Right.
You know, so
they just had smaller budgets.
Yeah, it was a decision to make studio films with smaller budgets. But the reason why A24 works in
Blumhouse was the other one. That's what it is.
Yeah, Blumhouse. Yeah. But the reason why they work is because they mostly make horror. That is almost mostly what they make. And so they've kind of pushed into what was normally like our territory. You know, they're you know, low budget horror is sort of meat and potatoes for an independent filmmaker because it's one of the only reliable ways to get an audience and things like that, you know?
Right. And why is that? Like, why is it that horror is like a go-to? You know, I know I've seen the evidence over the last 30, 40 years of my own life to see that, you know, if you're going to be an upstart, nobody's going to buy your drama, right? Nobody's going to buy your comedy unless there's somebody of significance that's really funny. Comedy's really tough. You got to be real funny to pull that off, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to buy your action film unless there's good amount of special effects. There's, you know, foundation stars in it. And again, there's a big enough budget that it's believable and it's not wonky, unless the idea is to make it wonky. And you got to pull that off right too, which is weird, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, there's a number of things. As Bruce Campbell once said, horror films are a way that you can be scared in a safe way. Mm-hmm. So it's got a lot of shock value. That's one thing. The other thing too is incredibly forgiving audience, a huge built-in audience, but an incredibly forgiving audience. Horror film is very much like pizza. If it's bad, it's still pretty good.
Yeah, it's still pizza.
Know, it's still pizza, yeah.
Right.
And another way to say that is a bad horror film is almost as good as a good horror film. Like, it just ends up being just as entertaining, if not more. Right. I mean, look, it's you know, sex and violence sells. You know, more so in the past, the sex and violence were more evenly dispersed. Mm-hmm. And then it's been sort of, in the mainstream, it's been sort of very, kind of phased out. Although it's coming back. You watch The Substance, there's quite a bit of nudity in it, too.
Yeah, I still gotta see that.
But somehow they've tried to ride this line of Academy Award, you know, tastefulness.
Yeah, don't try to be too many things, right?
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, I loved Demi Moore, but I'm like, it's a trashy B movie. And I love it, but I don't understand the Academy Award praise. I mean, there's a lot of horror films that do have really interesting social commentary, stuff like that. It would never come 100 miles from the Academy Awards or the Golden Globes, you know?
Not a huge fan, but the first Saw was like, oh my God, like people were just like, Carrie
well,
Ells, or
it's
how
true.
do you say his last name? Carrie Ells?
Elways, yeah.
Elways. I mean, of all people to be in that kind of movie
Yeah,
like that.
with
You're like,
his
what?
consistently awful American accent. I love him from Princess Bride. I think he's brilliant. He has the worst American accent I've ever heard in my fucking life, and they keep hiring for American roles. Anyway, but no horror. But then there's horror that pushes the envelope in the mainstream, as you said. The Saw movies, they're still making them. There's stuff that's really hardcore, like Martyrs or Serbian Film or what is it, 100 Days of Sodom or.
Yeah.
I mean, there's hardcore
Stuff I'll never touch.
Yeah, but then A24 I think tries to ride the more like, I'll call it Kubrickian horror, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the A24 tries to be art horror, so they try to be like The Shining, or Friedkin's The Exorcist, or they try to be like Rosemary's Baby, or they
Well, I felt that way about Megan. I felt like Megan was playful, it was scary enough. Of course, it's PG-13, so they can only push the envelope so far. But there was a lot of suggestion off camera of kills and stuff that didn't have to be ultra violent or ultra gross for you to get the intensity and the scariness of it. It's kind of an introduction to horror if you're interested in it. It's more of like a sci-fi,
Yeah, very funny. Very funny too. It knew exactly what it was. There's a wink to the camera. And although I think the self-awareness in films it's gotten out of control, the fourth wall breaking, it just typically I see that as a wildly insecure writer or director who constantly needs to, break the fourth wall.
Right? Did I do this right, guys?
Yeah. Let me hedge. Let me hedge my bet. Let me keep hedging my bet. I think, but then there are some people that do it, tremendously. Like if you think breaking the wall goes back to just theater. So breaking the fourth wall is as old as humanity, really.
Right.
If someone would be in a play and then shift over to the audience for a second, that's what it is.
My daughter just got into Modern Family, so she's watching the old episodes of that. And there was one we were watching together, and they look at the camera and they start talking to her. I go, "Do you know what that means?" Like, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "When they talk to the camera, do you know that means breaking the fourth wall?" And that's just it's a thing that doesn't always happen, but when it does, and if it's done artistically and it's done correctly, it adds value to the experience.
Yeah, it can. I mean, our generation usually goes back to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Like that was probably one of the earlier mainstream exposures to that kind of wall breaking. And then like the
Guest?
Low rent. What was that?
Was that David Guest or Steve? What's the
Christopher Guest?
Christopher Guest. All his movies, those are all fourth wall breakers. Mighty Wind.
They're mockumentaries.
Because they look at the camera and they have a discussion directly with the audience, right?
Well, but the characters think they're on a document. The characters think they're being documented by a documentary crew when they do look to the camera.
So is that like a pseudo fourth wall? Because in essence, it's looking at the camera and kind of breaking tradition, like the traditional, like you're not just watching them act. They're actually reporting their feelings to a documentary camera. But I've always felt that it has that the same vibe as say like a Park and Rec or whatever.
Yeah, I would say I would agree that it has the same vibe. You could argue that it doesn't break the fourth wall. That I think maybe that's why they coined the phrase mockumentary.
Okay.
The thing is that mockumentary it's very old. I think there was a French film called Land Without Bread, and it was hilarious. Like, I mean, I think this was in the 1920s.
Oh wow!
They show like a guy like washing bread in the river and then eating it. They show like a 70-year-old man, and we're like, this man is 25 years old, and it was making fun of the region. I think a southern region is in France. It was making fun of the people that live there. It would be like me making fun of Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah. And showing a 70-year-old guy who's been baking in the sun and be like, this man is 25 years old, So mockumentary.
This man is a baby.
Yeah. Mockumentary is very old, and it must exist in literature as well. And if it exists in literature, then it's as old as humanity,
Yeah.
So
the Video Dreams, What's our estimated ETA on finishing and hopefully submitting to film festivals? And like, this is very fluid, guys. So
Yeah.
you know,
So the documentary on I'll just say on us trying to get on the shelf at Blockbuster, it's about at the 66-minute mark as of today. I imagine it'll be around 80 minutes. We're a year and 2 months into the project, and I imagine having a rough cut about mid-year 2025, polishing towards the end of the year. So film festival run would start earliest late 2025, early 2026. Probably do that for close to a year, and then look into film distribution. We're probably looking at MVD again.
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Because I think they're doing a strong job with. They did a strong job with Exorcism of Fleet Marish and
American Expendables.
American Expendables, which was a documentary Tim did all the music for and was in and produced. And that was about North American Pictures catalog and direct-to-video action stars like Cynthia Rothrock and Billy Blanks.
Just so everybody knows, this is typical for our throughput, right? Like, there's a conception idea, there's initial footage capture, some stock footage, like looking around, you'll do some research in the background. Like, that first year is really kind of setting up the matrix, if you will, of the entire film and getting a feel for how it's going to flow, dropping things into a timeline, back and forth between you, me, a couple of respected and people that we respect their opinions, and they give constructive criticism back to us. And we do that for a good solid year while we're building a project to a point where, you know, maybe we have another 3 to 6 months at that year mark to review, go back through, make sure it's landing the things that we want to land. But just like music, just like a piece of art, physical art, at some point you have to put it down and just be like, it's as done as it's going to be, and it's time to put it out in the universe and the world and see how it resonates with people. And so that whole throughput process can be anywhere from like a year and a half to 3 years, right?
Yeah. And there's multiple times where we'll throw ideas back and forth, and I'll actually start working on stuff for like a few months, and it just kind of dies on the vine, or it just doesn't feel right. And then
there are a couple narratives you did that with. We talked about, it doesn't really matter what the subject is, but we talked about a couple different things, and literally went down a rabbit hole for a little bit. And I remember a few times you coming back to me and being like, yeah, I hope this isn't disappointing. I'm just not feeling it. Like, it's not exciting me. It's not pulling me forward. I reference the big magnet, you know, like you listen to the universe and the inspiration, and it's like, man, the big magnet's not pulling me on this one. I can't get around it. And who is it I was looking at recently? There was something motivating on TikTok or Reels or something, and I think it's crazy. It's like Bashar, you know, the dude that's supposedly an alien or whatever, and I'm like mocking him, and it's real. Imagine that. But literally, like, find whatever you're excited about, whatever generates excitement, and like resonate on that to the fullest extent you can. Like, that's like the purpose of life, is to find those things. The thing that wakes you up in the middle of the night that you're like, I gotta finish this. I have to finish this. Like, that's what happened to me 4 or 5 years ago with music. I literally got this like punch in the back of the head, like, dude, it's doing no work for you on a hard drive. Get it out there. And then, you know, I got good friends like you that turn around and be like, hey, why aren't you doing what McLeod does? You know, how not better to get it in people's hands?
Yeah. Well, I remember I was like, because at the time you had like almost 100 songs or something. Like, what are you doing with them? You know?
I'm like, no, I don't know. What's the next movie I could put it in?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Waiting around, you know. I noticed too, it's like, I think for many years, I made my living as an editor at a CBS News affiliate, NBC Universal, Black 20. There was more shooting, directing. But I kind of, even some College Humor stuff and IGN stuff, I burnt out so hard on making other people's stuff, like basically using your creative heart to fulfill other people's creative ideas. I burned out so hard on that shit that by the time I hit my fees, I could not do it anymore. And ended up segueing into academia, and I can only work on stuff that I'm really digging. It just so happens I can't talk too much about it, but I have a really fun side project Tim's going to be part of. We're going to shoot some stuff in the summer. And it just so happens that the idea that was pitched and who it was pitched by, I was like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
But that's like pretty rare for me.
Yeah. Sorry we have to be dodgy about it, but
yeah,
it promises to be very exciting. And
yeah, I literally can't say too much about it. But yeah, that was just, an opportunity actually came around. And I realized, like, I say no to an awful lot of stuff these days because my time is so limited,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, 5-year-old will do that to you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the main job. This is just the side fun stuff,
That's right. Yeah, but this is like to what you said earlier, Tom. It's the sole reason that in my mid to late 20s, the idea of going out and doing cover songs anywhere or playing somebody else's music, anything of that regard, had zero interest to me, zero excitement about that. I've always felt the most excitement by just ideating and thinking about some kind of musical sonic tapestry that just comes into my head, and I'm like, ooh, this will be fun to make. Let's just do that. And then over time, I've developed the skill, which honestly, I think it's a skill and a discipline, of not editing yourself and just allowing the creative process to flow through you and just make things for the sake of making it. And honestly, not giving a care what anybody has to think about it. And that's when your true artistic expression comes through. I think a lot of people approach music, movies, drawing, painting, anything, and they get these inspirations, these famous people, and they try to emulate those people. That's good in the beginning. That's great. Practice those skills, reinvent those skills. But here's the point. Reinvent those skills. Repurpose them to your capabilities and your unique vision of the world. And then what happens is it brings out this creativity in yourself that nobody else can express. It's only you. Only you can express that pure creativity. But it only comes through when you remove that filter. And one of the best ways I've found to remove that filter is a level of discipline in songwriting ideation. So like doing like a Monday, Friday, like I talk about, where I just sit down and I'm like, I don't have to finish any of these. And if I only come up with 1 or 2 today, that's fine. If I come up with 10, that's amazing. But I'll come down and I'll drop down a melody. Great. I can't do anything more with that right now. And I don't want to overthink it. Next one.
I think, on that subject, like the idea of, an artist creating music, like one thing is like your guard's up a lot of the times. So I think sometimes when you're an artist and you're emulating other artists, that may have to do with, it's a safe bet. You like that song, but that's also a safe bet.
Right.
And then keeping that guard up. There's an old saying like anxiety causes, I forget, it's a slick saying, but anxiety can cause you to be dumb at the moment.
Right.
Even though you're not, you're like, oh. But there is something about that. I think creativity, like you were saying, when you're kind of in that zone, it's early in the morning, you're sitting down, there's no judgment. You're just trying to do it for yourself. Then some really good stuff could come out. But it's hard for an artist to, especially like a filmmaker, when you've had your films reviewed and people like shit on your work, then it's very hard to just not take some of that stuff into account, because there is the other part of it. Like, hey, you should take your medicine. And if 20 people are saying the same thing about your film, you should go in and look at it. You might have messed up and you should learn from it.
Have the self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
That maybe there's an aspect of the craft that you don't know well enough, or you may have misinterpreted how the audience feels about the way that you emulated whatever it is that you're producing. It takes a little thick skin. I think over the years, I've had enough of the type of job that I can handle a certain level of talk and criticism at this point, where if somebody hates something I do, I'm actually kind of excited about it. I'm like, what about it did you hate? Like
Yeah.
that's a strong feeling.
It's a strong.
I evoked that feeling out of you for this piece of music. Why? Like, I want to
Yeah.
know why. And
Tell
like
me more. Yeah.
the person's response that I'm not defensive, in fact, I want to embrace it, may actually create a lifetime fan, because they might turn around and be like, wow, this guy has no qualms about his art. Because the truth is that it's just our job to make it. It's not our job to have anybody like it. That's their job. If they like it, then it's like building your own tribe, right? Like you can't decide what audience is going to be your audience. You just have to put the stuff out there, and then suddenly, like you've said this to me, if you build it, they will come, right? You go to the old movie reference there, and it's like, it's
Field
true.
of Dreams. Yeah.
A little Field of Dreams action. I mean, you literally create the stuff, and I never know what's gonna do the thing for my audience, and I'll release a compilation of things like in the digital spectrum or whatever. I'm like, well, I can't figure out what genre or category these are, so I'm gonna have like this, like a mixed bag of electronica or maybe glitches or something like that. And dude, then they ended up being like, kill it. Like, a couple of the tracks on it will just kill it, and they're like, dude, I don't even know where that came. Like, that's awesome. Like, blah, like, what is that? And it's because I didn't care. I'm just like, well, yeah, here you go. See if you like it.
Yeah, like I think about that too. Like when we started doing the first VHS Massacre with Ken Powell, it was like I just wanted to make something for Trauma, Trauma was pretty niche. It had a very solid audience base over the past 50 years, and it was going to be a little doc, but my heart was really in it, and I really wanted to be as good as I possibly could. And so it was as much for me as it was for them. And they didn't know that, like, they didn't know about it. I interviewed Lloyd, but he was like, he does like 20 interviews a day. So, or not, 20 interviews a month. So basically I had no idea that the movie could hit the heights that it did.
Right.
Because if you looked at every streaming site that it was on, I mean, it was like over 20 different streaming sites, and like both movies, 30 awards. It actually puts it technically as a mainstream success. It's not, it's beyond cult appeal.
Yeah.
It's that the penetration into the market was that deep, where it was actually, bordering on a mainstream success,
I remember the Film Freeway updates we'd get on that for the various festivals we submitted on 1 and on 2. And we did a couple of pretty bang up campaigns to promote this. Because, like, ultimately, that's how an independent filmmaker these days gets it in front of audiences, is the festival circuit. We couldn't afford to pay a distributor and get it into a bunch of different theaters. We would be super in the red trying to do it that way. So the only way we can really get this into people's hands and to see how the audience responds to it is to do it this way. And my God, if it was a one-off, I'd be like, oh yeah, it was a goof. But 3, 4, 5 films into doing it in this manner, we're on to something.
Yeah,
as an independent filmmaker or a little to no budget filmmaking, this is the way to go. This is how you get people to get optics on your art. And if nothing else, that legitimate review of your movies are happening in various different, now that's remains to be seen with some of the mid to upper level ones that are basically an extension of the studio system that premiere a movie before it's actually premiered, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I
don't want to shit on any of that stuff, because there's still some value to some of those festivals. However, I know as the independent level that you and I are at, it's a challenge to resonate at that level without star power.
Yeah, like something like Sundance or Tribeca or New York Film Festival. I mean, I basically call them for what they are. I mean, they're corporate events. Those films are not like. Those films are all typically like, it's not even a film market much anymore. Like, a lot of those films already have deals in place. They are straight up studio or Silicon Valley productions that it's purely as a precursor to either small theatrical or precursor to streaming.
Yeah. We talked about that back in the several months ago, either in a podcast or it was on something that you posted on social media about Bottle Rocket, right? Like,
yeah, but Bottle Rocket was not an independent film by any stretch of the imagination. It was multi-million. I think they might have spent $3 million on it. It had James Caan in it, and it was Sony Pictures. So like a lot of the illusion of independent filmmaking was just that. A lot of it wasn't real.
yeah.
They were
30
very
years
good.
ago too, right? I mean, that was
Yeah.
like 30 years ago.
30 years ago, yeah.
And even if you're talking 3 million, what does that equate to today? 10?
Yeah.
Like a 10 budget? $10 million is
Or
what
9, yeah, 8 or 9 maybe, yeah.
that's what they made Megan with. That's what they made
Yeah.
Godzilla -1 with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Close to it.
So A24 is very similar. They're not independent films, but they're very good films. They're probably the best films being made now. So like you shouldn't shit on them for not being independent, but like they're definitely not, you know.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of the filmmakers that were part of that indie film movement were not. And yeah, we talked about that before, but even Kevin Smith, who I think's awesome, he got real lucky. Clerks originally had a bad ending, and it looked like shit, and it sounded like shit. And they let him into Sundance, I believe, and I think it was Weinstein, the charmer, scumbag Weinstein. Like they poured, I think it was over $100,000 to $200,000 into reshooting the ending.
Right? Yeah.
Recolor grading, fixing the film print, redoing all the audio. And so.
And again, off a $30,000 budget or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is also, it remains to be seen what exactly that was. If any of that was a fabricated number based on like in-kind stuff. You know what I mean? Like we gave you a location. That would be worth 10 grand. We gave you this. We gave you that. Whatever that means. But at 30 to like upwards of, let's say, $250,000. It probably cost them that.
Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah.
Everything else.
And then, but adjust for inflation again, you're talking like $500,000 to $750,000. Yeah, maybe even. So that's not to say Smith is still incredible for being able to do that principal photography for so little. But the truth is, and he is an independent filmmaker, but the truth is the film you and I and all of America saw when we rented that VHS, adjusted for inflation, it's pushing $1 million, really.
Yeah.
And
it was not the original concept. It was definitely touched
the
on.
ending. Yeah, the ending was changed. So yeah, it wasn't the original concept.
Yeah. And Miramax put its shiny cover on things so that it was marketable. It did what, like $1.5 million in the theater? So technically it was a win. If you look at it that way.
Yeah, probably. Well, I don't know what they spent on marketing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It might have broken even.
But this comes back to the thing I said earlier, which is it was released in a time frame where something could do lousy in the theater, and then you had pay-per-view for 90 days. You had streaming channel, the movie channel, HBO.
Yeah, cable was
exclusivity for 6 months.
Yep.
Then you had sell-through or direct-to-video store, where you got the latter, you got $70 a copy for every copy that a video store bought. And then ultimately you got the sell-through, or it was just available wherever you wanted to. And then you could build a cult following of it from there. And then people wanted their own copies. People still wanted physical media. So and a whole different universe.
Yeah, Smith was like the king of home video. I mean, he that's most of his career.
I mean,
most of his career was home
Mallrats,
video.
Chasing Amy.
Yeah.
Right? Like those 3 movies, I remember we were video store rats at the time, basically, and followed that career from start to success. So
that template kind of worked for a while. That in Connecticut there wasn't that many art house theaters. There was one in East Hartford. There was one near you where you used to live in Hartford, little one. Yeah, I think you did a Q&A there once.
Yeah, we did 2 movie festivals there. That was what is it? it'll come to me. It'll come to me.
But then, yeah, maybe a one or two down in New Haven, but that still kind of work. Like small films could premiere in the theater there. I don't think they typically kill it, but even if they broke even, then that would prime the film as a sort of established art house film, and then it could do well on home video. Now for independents, I mean, the good thing is if you know what you're doing, you can do all the post-production, all that stuff, and prep it and hand it off to the distributor yourself. But then the distributor has 2 or 3 middlemen to get to the streaming sites, and sometimes you have to pay to be on those streaming sites. So
yeah, and then there's a revenue share all the way through that ladder, right?
Yeah.
So every time you get somebody else involved, it chips away more and more. Ultimately, your recoup and your profit. So, I mean, you got to do this from the beginning as a labor of love, first and foremost. You think you're going to get into this industry and get rich. It's a great feeling if you get there, but still do it for the art first. First of all, you don't want to jeopardize your story or your message by contorting it, because it's not gonna be authentic.
Yeah,
you know,
people do have to understand that studio films nowadays are large corporate products, and the people who helm those things it's work for hire. Very rarely can a director get in there, do an original concept that is theirs, and execute it in a way that they actually want to. Believe it or not, the modern filmmaking is a lot like it was when I was cutting news at CBS. It was like, this is the script, cut the footage, put it out. It was, you were making widgets. It was purely functional. It wasn't, there are a few auteurs, filmmakers still out there. I do think A24 will indulge some of these filmmakers.
Yeah.
So they still can do that, but even some of the best working directors, I think that guy Eggers did that Nosferatu remake, and I'm sure he loves it. I'm sure he loves Nosferatu, but like, think about that. He's had to do a remake. It's a remake of one of the coolest vampire movies ever,
Yeah,
it's
one of the oldest feature-length films, for that matter, right? I mean, that's an old movie.
Very old movie, yeah. So yes, it's really rare. And the people that can do that, like, kind of pick whatever they want and make it. Like, even Scorsese struggled for years and years and years to get The Irishman made. And Spielberg, apparently, when he made Lincoln, they were just going to make that an HBO film.
Oh, no kidding.
That was like a decade ago, right? Maybe more. So, like, think about that, It's Spielberg, and they wanted to stick his movie on HBO. So
look at the thing with Bourne Identity there, the lead, Matt Damon.
Yeah.
He wanted to do a drama. I forget what the title was, or I don't even know if they even released it, but he had a budget of, say, like 25 million, right? And he's like, I want to make this movie. And the studio was like, no. And they're like, why? Because that's 100 million before we break even, or before we make any money. And then went through all the financial of that, the revenue share with the individual movie theaters, right? And then the fact that you have to double the budget with marketing just to get people to come and watch it, because dramas are a hard sell, right? And literally, it cost $100 million. It would be $100 million before they made any money, and they're just not willing to take those kind of risks anymore. And you're just like, it's Matt Damon, dude. Like, what, top 10, 20 actors in the world should be able to draw it? They're like, nope. It just goes to show you, it's hard.
It's very hard. Hard. They've had to. I think Matt Damon and Ben Affleck started their own company, so they would have a little control. And I'm sure, I think Affleck's been doing a few movies with Netflix for a while. So, but in regard to still being able to write a check like that for a big movie, Netflix seems to still do it to some degree, even though I think they were spending money like maniacs.
Well, the secret there is this.
Interest rates? Or
No. The secret with Netflix, at least one of, like, it's not really a secret. What they do is they pay everybody a flat fee.
Yeah.
They're like, here's the deal. We're going to do Don't Look Up you're going to get a flat amount as lead actor and actress, right? But residuals are gone. This is all you get, right? Whereas in other parts of the industry, those residuals happen year over year over year. And, and even those deals, individually, if you look at it, it's not what those people made for peak. Even the leads, the main leads, like, Jennifer Lawrence and stuff like that, they made like 12.5 or something like that a piece. And, at a peak, that level, you're talking, like $20-30 million for some of those people. But I look back at those budgets and I think, like, dude, that's never like that. We're not coming back to that anytime soon until inflation catches up and movie budgets are $500 million regularly, and people are making 30 million because inflation has pushed you to that point. But that's that level of excessive cost to buy somebody in. They're going to have to ride the wave with future movies. They're going to have to take the same risk that the studios are, because they don't just, there's just, again, it comes back to the revenue streams. There's only a few after it's out of the theater. And if it doesn't resonate in a theater,
yeah, I mean, they don't you're talking about streaming and how to get paid like that. So only the most high profile in demand people will be able to draw those paychecks from Netflix.
Yeah.
And they're also in a position to be able to do that, right? Like, even though everyone else on that crew, like the day players, are probably sitting there like, hey, I made $5,000 off that movie. Like, and that's it. That's all I get forever. And to some degree, that's fine. If that's the deal, that's the deal. Yeah. I mean, moving forward, how new filmmakers are going to evolve out of this stuff is interesting. I think one of the biggest problems why so many of the films are bad is that I don't think film studios are drawing from the independent film world very much these days, and the edifice that allowed independent filmmakers to sort of build up and move into studio filmmaking, I think those were pretty much stamped out. I think it ends up being just a wildly nepotistic system in which people are promoted purely from who their relatives were, what
safety too.
Safety, right? And the backup remakes, for that is what very specific California college. They did that. There's some of that in New York with the film schools. It's absolutely no guarantee of the quality of the person's art or their character.
The struggle is the studios don't want to take a bath on something they're spending multiple millions of dollars on, so they go with the safe stuff. Remakes, nostalgia, sequels, piggybacking off of any and all things that had a really good audience response and resonated well across multiple genres, multiple, groups of people, and just maximizing the return on the investment in these movies. And that's not art.
No,
it's art to an extent, Tom.
And they seem to hire non-technical, non-artistic, non-proven bureaucrats, to
there's
head
a reason.
This project.
There's a reason. Because if you're doing the thing that's already been done with a different flavor, what you're producing now is a marketing piece. It's not art, right? You're in essence marketing the same thing with a different package and hoping for the same result. And that inauthenticity, I don't think I've ever said that word before. Yeah. It comes through in the finished product. It's like, okay, this is a sequel to X. Well, it feels like a rehash of the first movie, and now I feel like I've been, cheated out of 90 minutes of my life.
Yeah, well, it's like Joe Bob Briggs said, independent filmmaker is there to do something new, something fresh, something that no one has ever done before. The film studio is there to do the exact same thing that made money the time before, the exact same way, to hopefully get the exact same result.
Right.
So it's literally, it's no wonder these things are just, apples and oranges. It's just two different things. Yeah.
Right? It's this weird psychology, like you want to strike gold again. And you're like, maybe if we dig in the same place, well, guess what? You mined 90% of the gold the last time you were there. So to think that you're going to get another 90% is ludicrous.
Well, that stuff is typically fostered in the independent world.
Mm-hmm.
And so because in the United States, there's, like I said, there's no support for the independent film, and the studio system and corporate filmmaking probably see us more as especially with YouTube and all, see independent filmmakers as a direct threat rather as a minor league. So, and I think what you actually have is there's so many foreign filmmakers now, and it's not, I have no problem with that, but it's because they're in their individual countries. There's probably the independent film movement is probably more supported, and there's a whole structure in place to have that work. Whereas I think in the American, it's so commerce based,
Right.
that I think it's like, and they're struggling so much that it's,
The hands are tied, right? I mean, it's
well,
literally...
it's also block. I mean, for the past 30 years, like, is it a coincidence that I didn't get paid out for most of the feature-length films I directed over the years, even though the films were profitable? Like, this company goes under, this company never meets their recoup. There's always an excuse. Even if the contract's good, you never get the check. It's only in the past maybe 5 years working with MVD where you start to see some money come in.
Yeah.
So I think it's set up that way. I
Yeah.
think it's the United States film industry is set up to starve independent filmmakers because they're a direct threat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we can make a feature-length documentary or narrative film for little to no budget, and we can create an audience that loves it and resonates with our work, it pulls that attention away from the main studio system and the money-making machine that is that, right? And that's a like you said, a direct threat, and it's a conflict to them, and they'd either want to do one of two things: squash us or acquire. And when you acquire, well, then ultimately you have to decide how much of your art you're willing to compromise for that paycheck. And that's the struggle.
I think to some of the streaming sites, independent films are of value only in bulk. If they,
Right.
If you're on Prime and you're looking at what your offerings are and you're saying, oh man, the deal we have with Warner Brothers, it's expiring. We're going to lose 100 of their titles. Actually, we're gonna have a real deficit of titles here. Let's call up MVD. Give me 500 horror films, and we'll give you like the price of a single A-list film.
Right. Now they have this catalog they can stream.
Yeah.
And for their customer base that wants to see things that are a little more obscure, have some diversity in what they're watching, and ultimately it pays dividends to people like
it
us.
Looks good, yeah. And if a lot of them are horror, some of them will be watched. So I think that's why there's still some basic things in place that lets independent film survive, But it's definitely kind of scraps.
What have you felt like the challenge has been the last several years making film? Like what and how have you overcome that? I know the answer to this question, but the audience doesn't necessarily know. So,
well, yeah, I mean, just having a family now, having a daughter, and then COVID. She was born in 2019, and then COVID hit, and then also trying to work, and without going into detail, but the job was not acting very nobly towards their employees, and so it was chaos for like several years actually. And so I try to chip away at things, but I noted, and I was finishing off my MFA degree. So I actually realized like my capacity was really dwindled. I could only work on things for like 10 minutes at a time. I know I couldn't go out and shoot stuff. I know I couldn't do a narrative film, but at that time I noticed that Trauma Entertainment, who put out the VHS Massacre films, had acquired a catalog for North American Pictures films. And so I was thinking like how much of a documentary could I make sitting in this chair, And I tried for a while and actually died. I set it down for like maybe a year and then picked it back up.
We actually did a series of podcasts on it.
Yes. Yeah.
And explored it that way, and then had a limbo period, right?
Yeah, in the podcast ended up being like I went back to it a year or two later because we had an IMDb listing because it was in pre-production, and I looked at that listing. I said, "American Expendables, man, that's such a cool documentary. You know, what can I do?" So I spent like an entire day taking our podcasts. I had a few little Lloyd interviews and a Debbie interview, and I kind of stuck this thing together, and it was 70 minutes, and I just released it on YouTube. And I was like, okay, well, that listing now is real. American Expendables.
Right.
But, and unexpectedly, without any promotion or anything, it did across all mediums like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. I think it was something like 5,000 views, which it's very good for my social media presence. And I contacted Debbie. I was like, you think there's something here if I build this out? She's like, yeah, you know.
And she was excited.
Yeah.
She was very excited.
She's like, I'll be part of it. Yeah. So then Debbie, James Richardson took some convincing. And then obviously you were in it. And then Cynthia Rothrock agreed.
I'm on board for everything. You don't have to convince me. I'm on board for everything.
And then Cynthia Rothrock, you know, was able to let me use an interview. So we put that in there. And then two of the most important things was an interview I shot with Lloyd during COVID at his house, oddly enough.
Yeah.
And then the premiere of one of his films called Shitstorm. And that ended up being the end of the film. Anyway, cobbled this thing together over like I think 2 or 3 months. I kind of re-sculpted this thing and showed you a million cuts of it and put it out, and was very unsure of it. And then I think you were like, dude, just let's do the festivals. It was fun, you know, let's just do it, you know. And so we did that, and it won 8 awards. Yeah, just
and
one.
15 official selections, something like that.
Yeah, 15. Yeah. And
what was the ratio? It was a high ratio.
It was a 50%, over 50% selection rate. So we got into half of the things we entered, and then we won 30% of the total entered. So it was a 30% win rate.
Yeah.
So that was
which is unheard of. Like I don't think we had done that up until this point. Which
no
speaks to a couple different things, Tom.
I think VHS 2 had a 30% win rate, but oddly a lower selection rate.
Well, we also threw it at a lot more festivals.
Yeah.
So
double.
That makes sense. But it speaks to a couple things, Tom. It speaks to this process that we've discovered in, you know, out of I don't want to call it desperate, out of necessity, because with COVID and everything else, like everything had to be done remotely. So remote interviews, not unlike this, you know, but now that it's 4K, I might as well be in the same room with you. It doesn't matter, you know? And literally, what's the difference between me setting up a real tripod with another camera or doing this? If the audio's good, if the capture's good, and the edits are good, and then the post-production, like now I use Riverside to do this stuff, and this software is phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
I think you know, all this experimenting that we've done over the past, let's say 5 years with the festival run, maybe longer, maybe since 2016, maybe closer to 10 years. But what it's shown me is that like the Hollywood and the studio system is it's kind of repellent. Like I don't like 99% of what they're doing. I suppose I was always like that to a point, but there's always this thirst to try to want to be in that club. But I don't think they're the cool kids anymore. And if you and I can put a film out, play in 15 different cities around the world, win awards, use that as our festival run, use that as our theatrical run. That's our that's the new movie theater for us. We play in 15 cities. We release our independent film. It's streaming on like at least 10 different platforms, like Fandango at home, which is like kind of a big deal because that's like a gray area when often films are still in the theater. It goes on Apple TV, Prime, Tubi, all these other ones.
Yeah. There's commercials and stuff, but in essence, how else are you going to get it in front of people's faces?
Yeah.
You know?
But the point is, like, we've built our own little structure now. We built our micro edifice. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, I'm like, that's pretty cool. So I'm just gonna, gonna ride that for a while, see what I
Yeah.
can do with it.
Yeah, I'm excited about it because there's other things happening too that are probably nuanced that we won't see the metrics of it until we release 2, 3, 4 more films and be able to verify and validate what I'm about to say. But these festivals, I believe, are starting to get to know the work that we're presenting to them. So when they see a film from us, there's 2, 3, 4, 5 times it's run the festival circuit and it's gotten a good response and a certain percentage of response. And that doesn't go unnoticed because I feel like some of these festivals have immediately selected us simply based on the fact that they want to see it. They want to see what we did next, you know? And there's strange like loyalty that starts happening where it's like, okay, these people produce a good product. That by the time it comes to us, it's something worth watching. So let's include them in the festival and see what they had to say, you know? And here you go, 50% with American Expendables. Half the time, it resonated enough that it won some kind of award, which I think is brilliant. It's brilliant.
And I think that has to do with something you talk about too. I'd like to think there's authenticity there just because we really love the stuff, and we try to have fun with it. And I think too, what happens is those who keep doing it, whether it's music or film, if they keep doing it over decades, very slowly, probably without knowing, they keep getting better and better and better. Now, most people drop off. They give up. By the time they get to our age, they probably stopped 10 years ago,
Right. And I've seen countless examples of that, Tom. Where even close personal friends of ours that have gotten to a certain point and just decided that for whatever reason, and in some cases it's just a life change, they decided this was always a hobby for me, or this was never how I wanted to see my career continue on, and I don't think I was going to make movies forever, and they just move on to something else that's more important to them, and that's fine. But there are the ones that you saw real potential in, and they just got jaded and broken by the lack of validation, and I think...
Or life just beat them down.
Right. The bottom line is that they probably still have plenty to say, and it pains me to know that artistically we won't see more from some people, not just personal friends, but anybody else that goes through the same process and problem.
Yeah, and so though, think of the festival run, those people, or it doesn't even have to be like a bad thing, but they just had their fill. It was pleasant, and then they changed. They moved on to better things, something they wanted to do, So it's not always like, it can be a good move depending on what the art was doing for them, But a lot of those people fall out. Now, we're getting up there in age. And then, so what you have is, youth comes into play, and a lot of young people are incredibly, incredibly creative, incredibly talented, but are sort of wild in their rough edges of the work. Some of the stuff, there's genius in there, but it's so misshapen that it's like, well, we can't take this, And so,
they need time to stumble, right? They need they need projects to play with and to build their voice and build their audience and build the narrative behind the stories they want to tell. And if they don't have enough space to practice that, then that's just another batch of people that are going to disappear and go by the wayside.
Yeah, and a lot of them do in their youth, and then as they're working, like I would say, took me from about 17 when I had my first, well, unless you count when I had that Super 8 camcorder, but I'll count the start of VHS, what was maybe 16, 17, up until about 24 was when I made a film good enough to be distributed around the world, So that took quite a long time, and that was the third feature-length film. So most people make one and they're done,
And
so
they're lucky if they finish and produce that and release it, right?
Yeah, a lot of them, they're not proud of it, and they just keep it in the, I was always like, put it out, man, put it out. I was always
Exactly.
more like the Lloyd Kaufman, Roger Corman type, like, put it out and we'll work on the next thing. But like, my bigger point was that those who stay in it have slowly refined their craft, and so many people fall out of it. Then you're left with like very talented youth, or people who've really honed in.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's why we're getting selected more. We've aged into it because we haven't stopped. We just kept refining.
Well, that speaks to discipline, and maybe we can talk briefly about that as we wrap this up, Tom. What about discipline do you feel is what has kept you at this point producing things and making things happen and given you the energy and the stamina to keep going and be like, I'm not going to put this down. I'm going to keep ideating and creating new ideas and creating narratives and documentaries that speak to the things that resonate with you and me.
I've always felt like being creative is a way to deal with life. I've always felt like it's a form of escapism and something that I have somewhat control over. And it was always a catharsis for me, even when it was a pain in the ass. And so if I had my work life, if work was giving me stress, I could always go to my mental paradise of my own artwork. And so I think that's why I've carried on doing it. I think that people who keep doing films and keep doing music, like they really kind of have to, they're compelled to. And I still do think I have things to offer and things to give and to accomplish. I still have something in me that wants to communicate like this and a drive to do it. It's not the energy of youth, you know.
It's the energy of experience at this point.
Yeah. That Tennyson quote, we don't have the strength to move mountains. That which we are, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
we can move one stone at a time still.
Yeah.
And over a long enough timeline, you can move a mountain.
We can move a mountain. It just takes longer. But I think that's it. And I think also, you know, being a parent, what you do is you have to focus on one thing. And if you want it to be meaningful, you're going to be concentrating on it for an awful long time. So your focus just gets more, it's more concentrated.
In micro segments, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And a lot of people just can't work like that. A lot of, and this is weird because if you told me to sit down and read Lord of the Rings, I'd have a hell of a time. I'd have a hell of a time doing it. But if you told me to work on a feature-length film over 3-4 years, I could do that.
Yeah.
Can't tell you why. But then if I read a nonfiction book about filmmaking, I'd read through that thing really fast.
Yeah. That's a different, it depends what if it interests you enough, you're going to find the time to do something, right? And you're going to make and find the time. I can speak to the musical side of things. I can speak to discipline in the sense that even when I'm not doing something, I'm disciplined because the back of my brain is screaming at me, you've put down your writing keys for over a month now. Are you done? And there's like this weird thing that happens in the back of your head that's like, oh my God, like you haven't been creating, you haven't been ideating, you haven't been doing certain things. And it's important for the audience to realize that your brain does need time to relax. It does need time to just chill out and allow new ideas to come into play. Otherwise, for me personally, from a musical standpoint, I feel like I'm rewriting the same songs over and over again. Like those patterns are still stuck in my head. So when I put down my writing cap every once in a while for a month and a half, it's not that I'm bored. It's not that I don't have the interest. And it's not that I'm not inspired. It's I know the value of rest now. I understand that there's other things I can do. I can do other administrative work that promotes the things I've already done. Case in point is on YouTube now, when I'm not regularly releasing albums, I'm promoting older ones with new videos, letting people know that there's stuff out there they probably haven't seen. And oh my God, dude, like recently, that's just like pop, pop, pop. People that use my music are like, I didn't know you wrote jazz. I didn't know you wrote this cool thing called Glitch. I'm checking out more of that stuff. I didn't know you did this. Like, and I just realized that there's other ways to add value that isn't just firing out one song a day or something crazy like that. So, but the discipline is in knowing that there's these peaks and valleys in the creative process, and all you have to do is embrace the fact that you're not always going to be super productive. You're not always going to be super creative. Ultimately, it's staying on the ship and staying the course and knowing that we're just these beings that are channeling this creative energy and force, and just keep riding the ride, man. Stay the course, man. Do it long enough and your tribe will find you, and it'll support and help you find your way to an audience that appreciates the work that you're creating.
Yeah, man. Well said.
Well, on that note, dude, it was great catching up with you today. It was great talking shop with music and movies. And everybody, thanks for stopping in, and we'll see you the next time on a Tim Kulig Free Music Podcast. Take it easy, guys.
Thanks.